I'm Marley. I'm a product manager at Dropbox, and tonight I'm going to talk about how we can become better product managers by learning from people in government. Well, rather one particular person, and it's not former New York State Governor George Pataki, not former President George W. Bush, not Michael Bloomberg either, but this man with his eyes closed, my grandpa. My grandpa was in New York State government for almost 50 years, first as chief counsel to 3 consecutive speakers, and then as a lobbyist. So growing up, a lot of our family dinners revolved around politics. And since I was a kid, most of the time I didn't understand the conversation or blatantly ignored what the adults were talking about. But there was this one dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant with my grandparents that I distinctly remember. At this dinner, my grandpa started talking about how he helped push through the pooper scooper legislation. So as a kid, this is of course when my ears perk up. And he said that New York City was upset because dogs were crapping all over the street, in his own words, and the members of the assembly were actually pushing back on this piece of legislation that might otherwise seem very obvious because they were scared of their constituents getting fined. So he had to work hard to align 2 different sides in order to push this legislation through. And I just remember walking the streets growing up and seeing all the signs that say, pick up after your dog, clean up after your dog, or you'll get fined. And I never thought that my grandpa could have had anything to do with that. This was really the first time that I realized how influential my grandpa was. And over the years, he told more and more stories of his time in Albany, being on the floor for the death penalty debates, when abortion reform passed in New York State because one man switched his vote at the last minute going against party lines. In middle school, I even did a project during home ec class on how I wanted to be a lawyer, a lobbyist like my grandpa. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to influence like him. And clearly that isn't the profession that I chose to pursue. But what I've realized is that our jobs are actually not that different. Every day we have to influence our teams. We have to influence people. We have to inspire and motivate our teams. Get buy-in from senior leadership. Get alignment with our teams and stakeholders when there are competing priorities. Our success comes down to our ability to influence. But it's really, really hard. We often have to influence without any authority. And I just remember one time, there's many times I've struggled, but there was this one time I've struggled to influence in particular that stuck out. I was working on a feature, and we heard from our users that this would only be valuable if we released this to them cross-platform on their mobile devices as well. So I met with the mobile product manager at the time, Jamie, and I asked Jamie, hey, can we prioritize on this on your roadmap? This is this is why we're doing this. These are the problems that we're solving for our users. And during most of this conversation, Jamie was nodding, so I'm like, okay, this is a win. We're gonna get this through. But then I get an email a few days later from Jamie, and he's like, sorry, our team has other competing projects. We can't work on this right now. So I was frustrated. I kept rattling my brain thinking, where did I go wrong? And I knew that in order to become a better product manager, I needed to be better at influencing. So I turned to the one person I knew who was the great influencer, my grandpa. I sat him down on his big purple chair and I asked him, Grandpa, how did you become such a good influencer? What lessons have you learned that you can share with me so that I'll become a better product manager? So I'm going to share the 3 lessons that my grandpa shared with me that day. The first lesson is know your people. When my grandpa first arrived in Albany, he got this bio book with every member of the assembly, and he read that book cover to cover, learning about their families, their districts, the agendas they represented. He knew them personally and professionally, and he said that's why he was able to work with them and other times convince them to do things. And we don't have extensive bio books, but the lesson remains true for us. We need to get to know our people. We need to build relationships with them, start getting them to trust us. For different situations, we also need to get a good understanding of their needs and their concerns, why they will resist something that we're asking them to do. So going back to the situation I had with Jamie, this was something that I didn't do. I was so focused on why I thought we should prioritize this feature that I never asked him why he wouldn't want to prioritize this feature. So in my next meeting with him, I asked him a few simple questions to get an understanding of where he was coming from. What projects are your team working on right now? Why did you choose to prioritize those projects? What are you concerned about? And by asking him these questions, I now had a well-rounded perspective on Jamie's thought process. So from this, I learned that Jamie was really gunning for a promotion the next cycle and needed to show his manager results this quarter. He was also concerned about two things. The first was shifting resources away from a re-architecture project, and the second was that he already committed to a growth PM, that he would work on a project for their team, and he didn't want to rock the boat by shifting resources off of that as well. So by getting to know Jamie, I now had insight into all of the problems that I would need to solve to get my project prioritized, which leads me into my next lesson from my grandpa. Know your people's people. So for him, getting to know the members of the assembly wasn't enough. Each member answered to their constituents. So in order to get any piece of legislation through, he not only had to influence the members, but he needed to show the constituents the value as well. So for us, what this means is that we need to understand that when we're working with people, we're not the only people who are influencing them at that given point in time. We need to understand all of the key players and understand the influence that they have on the person we are trying to build this relationship with, the person we're trying to work with. So when we're in these situations, we should map out the key players and then create a strategy to figure out how we'll influence the influencers and bring everyone along on the ride with us. So I'm going to go back to my situation with Jamie. We learned from before that Jamie was concerned about two things: shifting resources away from the re-architecture project and shifting resources away from the growth teams project. So I knew that the two people I had to influence in this situation were Taylor, the tech lead on Jamie's team, and Rory, the growth PM. So when I thought about it, I was like, okay, Jamie is not going to prioritize this unless he has the buy-in from Taylor and Rory. So I decided that my strategy would be to invite Taylor and Rory to our next meeting. And to be totally fair, this could go completely wrong. Jamie could feel like I'm going around him, working against him. So I made sure to send him an email asking for his permission to do this. I wanted to help Jamie show the value of this project that I was trying to prioritize to Taylor and Rory. So I got us all in the same room so that we can openly discuss all of the trade-offs and come to a compromise that worked for all of our teams. And in the end, that's what happened. I had to sacrifice something. I had to sacrifice when this project would start. And Taylor, the tech lead, had to sacrifice one resource for the project. But in the end, we fit this in, and the feature ended up being a win for both teams. So I want to share one more lesson from my grandpa. He said, Marliana, influence means nothing unless people trust you. Be honest and don't bullshit. Bullshitting or telling white lies or outright lies may get us what we want at a particular point in time, but that could end up boomeranging back and hurting the other person, make them feel used, make them feel manipulated. And in the long run, we will have a struggle to influence them. So this lesson is really, like, I could have gone to Jamie and said, hey, I already spoke to your manager, and your manager signed off on this, it's a done deal, put this on your roadmap. Pretty sure I wouldn't get any other projects prioritized by Jamie in the future after that. So we need to think about the long game. So be honest and don't bullshit. It doesn't mean that we always need to be right. It does mean that we need to set expectations, say the bad with the good, and be comfortable saying, I don't know. And this is the lesson that the whole reason why I started the talk by saying we can learn from people in government. People in government not only show us how to be great influencers and the power of influence and what we can do with it, but they also show us the lines that we shouldn't cross when influence turns into manipulation. And that line is really the trust that people have in us. So to finish up, I just want to summarize. How can we become better influencers, become better product managers, become better leaders? We can get to know our people, build relationships with them, understand their needs, their concerns, ask them about their families, their weekends. We can then get to know our people's people, understand who is influencing them and how we can work with them. And finally, be honest and don't bullshit. Make sure you're setting expectations and always ask yourself, is your approach worthy of this person's trust? Thank you.